true Home Alone horror stories. Jessica is an ambitious young woman who has just purchased an old house in the suburbs after getting a new job in a nearby city. She has always dreamed of having her own private place to escape the hustle and bustle of life, and this house at the end of a quiet suburban street seems to be the perfect choice. With a large yard and old trees surrounding it, the house offers a sense of peace and seclusion that is ideal for her. When Jessica moved in, neighbors warned her about the strange stories surrounding the house. They said that the previous owners, an elderly couple, had mysteriously disappeared without a trace. Everyone assumed that they had left the house abruptly, but stories of strange noises at night and shadowy figures in the house continued to circulate through the grapevine. Jessica, being the practical and skeptical person she is, paid little attention to these rumors. She believed them to be nothing more than the product of imagination and urban legends. The first day passed normally. Jessica quickly rearranged her belongings and felt satisfied with her new home. But the first night was completely different. That night, Jessica woke up around 2 a.m. to a strange noise. At first, she thought it was just the creaking of the old house, but this sound was different from the usual noise. It was the sound of light footsteps on the wooden floor, coming from the hallway right outside her bedroom. Jessica sat up, feeling a chill down her spine. She listened, but the footsteps stopped, leaving absolute silence. She convinced herself that she was probably imagining things, the stress of moving. But as she lay back down, the footsteps came again, clearer this time, as if someone was moving very slowly right outside her bedroom door. Panic rose, but Jessica decided to face her fear. She got out of bed, grabbed the baseball bat she kept near the door, and opened the bedroom door. The hallway was empty. No one was there. But the feeling of unease was still there, the air cold as if someone had just walked through. Jessica is an ambitious young woman who has just purchased an old house in the suburbs after getting a new job in a nearby city. She has always dreamed of having her own private place to escape the hustle and bustle of life, and this house at the end of a quiet suburban street seems to be the perfect choice. With a large yard and old trees surrounding it, the house offers a sense of peace and seclusion that is ideal for her. That night, Jessica couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt like someone was staring at her from the darkness. The next day, Jessica tried to forget the strange events and continued with her work, but the strange events did not stop. In the evening, while she was cleaning the house, suddenly, the light in the living room flickered, then went out. In the darkness, she heard a faint whisper from behind, as if someone was standing very close and whispering in her ear. Jessica turned around, but the living room was completely empty. She quickly turned the lights back on, but the cold and tense feeling did not go away. The second night, the footsteps returned, this time more frequent. Jessica woke up in the middle of the night again, but this time, the noise wasn't limited to the hallway. She heard creaking coming from under the floorboards, as if someone was moving around in the basement. She couldn't remember ever going down to the basement since she moved in, and now the thought of it made her shiver. The unsettling feeling couldn't be ignored any longer, so Jessica decided to check the basement the next day, no matter how scared she was. The next morning, after mustering up her courage, Jessica went down to the basement. The basement lights were dim, flickering as she walked. The air was thick, damp, and stuffy, as if the place had been long forgotten. As the dim light shone into a hidden corner, Jessica noticed a small wooden door she had never seen before, hidden behind an old bookshelf. Her heart pounded as she approached. Her hand shook as she touched the doorknob. The heavy wooden door creaked as she opened it. Inside was a small room, empty except for a single wooden chair in the middle of the room. What was even stranger were the long, deep scratches on the floor, as if someone or something had tried to get out of this room. Jessica couldn't help but feel the dreaded startup. She slammed the door shut and ran upstairs. In her mind, she decided to sell this house as soon as possible. But before she could call the real estate agent, terrible events happened that night. As night fell, Jessica sat in the living room, trying to calm herself down. Suddenly, the front door of the house opened by itself with a slow creak. No one was there. She stood up, slowly approaching to close the door, but as she touched the doorknob, a cold wind blew past, carrying with it the feeling of an invisible entity passing through her. She turned and saw the light in the living room flicker, just like the night before. Then it went out, leaving her in complete darkness. But this time, it wasn't just darkness and silence. She heard footsteps approaching her, clear and creepy. They weren't coming from the basement anymore. They were right in the living room, just a few feet away. She turned and saw the light in the living room flicker, just like the night before. Then it went out, leaving her in complete darkness. But this time, it wasn't just darkness and silence. She heard approaching her, clear and creepy. They weren't coming from the basement anymore. They were right in the living room, just a few feet away. The shadow was not human, but an entity from the house's past. She realized that this was the reason the previous couple had disappeared. She could not escape, Jessica tried to scream one last time, but the sound was stuck in her throat. The next morning, the neighbor found the front door of the house wide open, but Jessica was nowhere to be seen. The house was empty, with only a cold feeling and a baseball bat lying on the floor as the only sign of a desperate struggle. Jessica is gone, like her previous owners. The house at the end of the street is once again deserted, waiting for the next victim to cross the threshold and fall into the vortex of unexplained mysteries. Emily moved into her small apartment just a few weeks ago. It's the perfect space for someone living alone, quiet, cozy, and well-equipped. She felt proud that she had finally escaped from living with her friends, and now she could enjoy her privacy. Every day after work, she enjoyed spending time cleaning and rearranging her room to her liking, decorating it with small potted plants on the windowsill and her favorite paintings hanging on the walls. However, every night since moving in, Emily has had an uneasy feeling that she can't explain. Although the apartment is always clean, airy, and filled with natural light during the day, when night falls, the space seems to transform into another entity. Sometimes she felt like there were eyes watching her from somewhere. Even though she told herself it was just a natural feeling of anxiety when living alone, Emily couldn't completely dispel that unease. On a cold, rainy night, after watching the horror movie, she blamed herself for choosing this genre to watch before going to bed. The movie was so haunting, full of creepy images and sudden noises that startled her. Emily quickly turned off the living room lights and returned to the bedroom, trying to quickly forget that creepy feeling. But as she lay down on the bed, turned off the lights, and pulled the covers over her, the strange feeling came over her again. A cold air seemed to be creeping up from under the bed to her feet. At first, she thought she was just haunted by the movie she had just watched. But as she closed her eyes and prepared to fall asleep, a soft sound rang out, like a soft breath, but very clear. Her heart began to beat faster, her mind became clear. She lay still, trying to listen more carefully. The breathing never stopped. It was steady and rhythmic, like the breathing of someone under her bed. Fear began to creep in, taking over Emily's entire body. She didn't dare move, afraid that if she moved, whatever was under the bed would realize she was awake. She had heard plenty of ghost stories from her friends, but she had never believed in the supernatural. But this moment was different. The breathing was too real. She wondered if someone was breaking into her apartment. Her heart pounding in her chest, Emily decided to face her fear. If there was someone under the bed, she had to do something. While mustering up all the courage to look under the bed, a soft voice suddenly rang out from below. "I've been here since you came in." Emily screamed in panic and rushed out of bed. Without bothering to put on her shoes or coat, she ran like crazy outside. She slammed the apartment door behind her. It was a drizzly night, and the streets were eerily quiet. Standing in the hallway, she gasped for breath and shivered. She couldn't believe what she just heard. Heart still pounding, Emily grabbed her phone from her coat pocket to call her best friend, only to realize that her phone's battery was dead. In her panic, she blamed herself for not charging it before going to bed. What should she do now? Her apartment was in an old apartment building, and at this hour, everyone was asleep. There was no one she could turn to for help. She couldn't stand out in the rain all night. After a moment of deliberation, Emily decided that she needed to go back to the apartment to get some things and charge her phone. She tried to convince herself that it was probably all just her imagination. After watching horror movies, she tiptoed open the door and stepped into the dark apartment. So quiet, she could hear her own heartbeat. Everything looked normal. The bed was still there, the windows were closed, there was no sign of any strangers. Emily walked softly towards the bed where she had heard breathing and voices. She stood a foot away from the bed, then took a deep breath, deciding to bend down and look under the bed. Darkness filled the air below, nothing but a dark void. No one there. A fleeting feeling of relief. She smiled to herself, mocking her irrational fear. She turned on the bedroom light and checked again. It was all empty. But as soon as she turned back, her eyes stopped at the mirror on the wall next to the bed. A line of black ink, scrawled across it, appeared as if it had just been written. "I will return when you are asleep." Emily couldn't believe her eyes. She took a few steps back, her whole body shaking. The cold, threatening words were clearly visible in the bedroom light. Her hands shook as she reached for her phone, but it remained off. Unable to bear it another moment, Emily rushed out of the apartment once more, but this time not with fear, but with despair. She ran straight to her best friend Jen's house, not far away. Jen opened the door, looking sleepy and worried to see Emily standing there, pale and shaking. Emily told her story in a jumbled manner, her voice hoarse with fear. Jen didn't quite believe what Emily said, but seeing the panic in her friend's eyes, she decided to stay with Emily for the rest of the night. The next day, after regaining some composure, the two returned to the apartment. Jeanne believed that Emily had been haunted by the horror movie and that her imagination had created the terrifying story. But when they entered the bedroom, the words on the mirror were still there, as clear as if they had just been written. Jeanne stood there, stunned, her eyes filled with confusion. None of them could explain what had happened. Emily couldn't take it anymore. She decided to move out immediately. This apartment, small and cozy as it was, had become a living nightmare. She hired a moving company to pack her things, but before leaving, she stopped in front of the apartment door and looked back one last time. And in that moment, she saw a shadowy figure, vaguely, looming through the window, standing beside the bed. The shadow leaned down as if staring at her. Frightened, Emily quickly closed the door and left forever, leaving behind the apartment with its unsolved mysteries. In the end, Emily never returned to that apartment again. Although the story of the shadow under the bed became a distant memory, the haunting and fear followed her throughout her life. She never knew what was really under the bed that night, and she didn't want to know. But one thing was certain: no matter where she was, she would never look under the bed again. Emily has just moved to an old house in the suburbs, which is quiet and away from the hustle and bustle of the city. The house seemed perfect to her: cheap rent, safe area, and fresh air. The previous owner had left behind a few pieces of furniture, and one of them was a large antique mirror that was placed right in the bedroom. The mirror had an elaborately carved wooden frame, but over time, the paint had peeled off. Looking at it, Emily felt a little uneasy. But she just thought it was a unique antique and left the mirror in the corner of the room, telling herself she would explore it later. The first night, Emily quickly fell into a deep sleep after a long day of cleaning. But in the middle of the night, she suddenly woke up. A cold and ominous feeling filled the room, as if something was wrong. She looked around, and when her eyes stopped at the mirror, she noticed a strange light flashing from within it. Confused, Emily rubbed her eyes and looked closer. The light flashed again, this time clearer. She slowly approached the mirror, trying to figure out what was going on. The mirror had always reflected her room, but now the image in the mirror seemed different. Instead of reflecting the room exactly, it reflected a different space, a dark, cold room with gloomy black walls and no furniture. Emily panicked and stepped back. She took a deep breath, reassuring herself that this was just her hallucination. But the light flickered again, stronger than before, pulling her back to the image in the mirror. A dark figure loomed in the distance, slowly moving toward her in the reflection. Cold sweat broke out on her forehead. She turned her head to look behind her, but her room was still empty. Turning back to look at the mirror, the shadow became clearer, as if it was gradually stepping out of the darkness, approaching the edge of the mirror frame. Emily panicked. She quickly grabbed the cloth to cover the mirror, but her hands shook and the cloth fell to the floor. She bent down to pick it up, but when she looked up, the mirror had changed. The shadow in the mirror had now transformed into a human figure. It was a woman with a blurry face, but her eyes were red like fire, staring at Emily from the other side. Her gaze was blank, lifeless, yet haunting, as if peering into Emily's mind. The sudden knock on the door made Emily jump. She rushed out of the room and ran downstairs to find someone, but the house was completely silent. Her heart was pounding. She tried to breathe to calm down. When she returned to the room, the mirror was back to normal. No more strange lights or strange images. In the following days, Emily felt uneasy every time she entered her bedroom. She began to have strange dreams about the mirror. In her dream, she found herself standing in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection, but she couldn't move. Every time she tried to run, her feet were pinned to the ground. And then the woman with the red eyes appeared again, dragging Emily into the darkness. Another night, as she was trying to fall asleep, Emily heard soft laughter from the corner of her room. She opened her eyes, her whole body stiff. The sound was unclear, but it seemed to come from the mirror. The flashing light appeared again, stronger this time, as if the mirror wanted to attract her attention. She couldn't stand it anymore. Emily decided to cover the mirror forever. She quickly took a large piece of cloth and covered the entire mirror. But as soon as she covered it, a terrifying roar came from inside the mirror, causing the cloth to tear and fall to the floor. The mirror began to shake violently. The reflective surface began to swirl like a door to another world. Emily tried to run out of the room, but the door was locked. She pounded on the door, screaming. But no one heard. When she turned, she saw that the woman in the mirror had stepped out of the mirror room. Her hand was reaching out from the glass, her cold fingers clinging to the frame. Her face gradually became clearer, pale, horrible, with dry, cracked lips as if she had been dead for a long time. Emily screamed in panic. The woman pulled her entire body out of the mirror and hovered in front of Emily. The creepy laughter rang out again, not from behind her anymore, but right in her head. She felt a chill run down her spine as the woman's red eyes stared straight into hers. The room went dark, and Emily felt like she was being pulled into an endless space. She tried to run, but her legs felt heavy, as if the space was holding her back. The walls around her began to close in, the darkness growing thicker. In desperation, she turned around and saw the woman approaching. Her hand raised, her long, sharp fingers ready to touch her neck. Suddenly, there was a loud noise. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to wait for the next stories.